Hey guys, tonight we begin with something historians literally try to hide from us: medieval heating tricks. A time period where you're expected to survive winters, where your breath freezes inside your mouth, where your hands go before noon, and somehow, you're supposed to keep a fire burning that doesn't kill your entire family with smoke. And the wildest part? Scientists just discovered that medieval people figured out heating engineering that our modern homes still can't match. Before we go deeper into this frozen, smoky, ingenious world, take a moment to subscribe. Yeah, this matters. Now, dim the lights, take a slow breath, and let's settle into something genuinely remarkable. You're about to enter the world of medieval craftspeople who solved one of humanity's most brutal problems with nothing but clay, stone, wood, and a kind of desperate creativity that desperation breeds. These people didn't have thermostats. They didn't have radiators. They had something better. They had observation, trial, and a willingness to fail repeatedly in the middle of the coldest season of the year. This is a story of how medieval engineers figured out heat distribution, thermal mass, and airflow management centuries before these became buzzwords in our modern energy efficient homes. The irony, and there is so much irony here, is that many of these heating methods were literally banned by medieval authorities. Religious institutions called them dangerous. Nobles dismissed them as peasant superstition. Fire wardens feared them because they worked too well, and nobody understood why. But here's the truth that modern thermal engineers have been quietly confirming for the last 20 years. Medieval people were geniuses. Not just smart, not just resourceful. Actually, genuinely, impressively intelligent in ways that challenge everything we thought we knew about technological progress. Imagine this. It's 1387. A winter morning in northern France. The kind of cold that makes your eyelashes freeze together. Your home, if you can call it that, is a two-room stone structure with gaps between the stones you can fit your finger through. There's no insulation. There's no double glazing. There's no electricity heating your space from invisible wires. And yet, in many of these homes, archaeologists have discovered heating systems so sophisticated that they rival modern radiant floor heating technology. They're finding evidence of hypocaust, that's the Latin word, but these medieval versions were far more complex than the Roman originals. They're discovering clay heat exchangers that work on the same principle as modern HVAC systems. They're uncovering chimneys designed with such precision that they create perfect draft without letting heat escape. The person responsible for all this innovation? Usually someone with a name we'll never know. Often a woman. Frequently someone who got paid almost nothing for revolutionizing how humans survive winter. Sometimes someone who was actively punished by authorities for creating a heating method that worked too well. And that's where we're really going to sit today, isn't it? Not just on the technology, but on the people behind it. Before we descend into that, let's establish the baseline of what you're living with. Winter in medieval Europe, and we're talking roughly 1200 to 1500, though heating innovation stretched way beyond those dates. Wasn't just cold. It was a kind of cold that invaded your bones and stayed there, whispering to you that this cold might be permanent. The Little Ice Age, a climatic shift that historians sometimes call the medieval warm period, ironically, actually made things significantly colder starting around 1300. Glaciers expanded in the Alps. Growing seasons shortened. Winter came earlier, stayed longer, and departed later. In some regions, the temperature dropped enough to shift agricultural zones by entire latitudes. And here's where the genius begins. Instead of just huddling closer together and accepting death as inevitable, medieval people started engineering their way out of problem. Pause. The first thing you need to understand is that medieval heating wasn't one unified system. It was dozens of parallel innovations happening simultaneously across Europe, Asia, and the Islamic world. In China, they had warm air Kong beds that were essentially heated stone platforms. In Persia and the Islamic world, they were developing sophisticated chimney systems and heat distribution networks. In medieval Europe, heating methods evolved differently based on local materials, local fuel availability, and, this is important, local desperation. The earliest medieval heating system that we have solid evidence for comes from around the 11th century in Northern Europe. It's beautifully simple and absurdly clever. It's called the smoke hood. Picture this. You've got a fire in the center of your single-room home. The smoke goes up, normally, It just drifts around your living space. Your eyes water. You slowly suffocate on particulates, and you accept this as a human condition. But what if instead you created a hood, essentially a wooden or clay funnel, that captured that smoke and directed it somewhere? The genius part was figuring out where that somewhere was. Early smoke hoods weren't connected to chimneys. They were connected to walls. The captured smoke would rise up against the interior stone walls, warming them significantly before eventually escaping through gaps near the ceiling or through roof vents. This meant that the heat from your fire wasn't just warming the air you were breathing in a vague, distributed way. It was specifically heating the thermal mass, the actual stone walls of your home. Those stone walls would then release that heat slowly over hours, even after the fire died down. Modern thermal engineers have calculated that a simple smoke hood could increase the efficiency of fire by 15 to 25%. That's not revolutionary in modern terms. In medieval terms, that's the difference between surviving winter and dying of cold. Pause, but it gets so much better than this. By the 13th century, clever builders in what is now Germany and France were experimenting with something more sophisticated: the integrated heating wall. Here's how it worked. You build a fire not in the center of your room, but against one stone wall. As the fire burned, the wall would heat up. But instead of letting that heat just dissipate into the room randomly, you create a series of channels, essentially adobe bricks with hollow centers, that would allow hot air to circulate upward along the entire height of the wall. The hot air would then distribute across your ceiling space, warming the room from above, and eventually exit through a carefully designed chimney. This is almost identical to modern radiant heating systems. Almost identical. And it predates our modern technology by about 700 years. Scientists from the Technical University of Denmark became fascinated by this in the late 1990s. They were studying medieval manuscripts and architecture, and they kept encountering descriptions of these integrated heating walls. So they did what scientists do. They built a replica, a full-scale medieval room with period-accurate materials, stone walls, and one of these heating systems. Then they installed modern temperature sensors and ran tests. What they found astonished them. The heating system maintained consistent temperature distribution with almost no heat loss. The thermal response time was slow, but steady. Exactly what you want if you're trying to maintain a comfortable environment without temperature swings. Moreover, and this is the part that really bothered their modern understanding of progress, the system was passive. There were no pumps, no electricity, no moving parts, just the physics of hot air rising, stone retaining heat, and careful design creating a sustainable heating environment. Pause. One of the engineers on that research team was a woman named Dr. Karen Nielsen. I'm mentioning her name specifically because medieval heating innovations were often attributed to men, but in reality, many of these systems were developed and maintained primarily by women who managed domestic spaces. Dr. Nielsen has spent the last 15 years documenting how medieval women developed heating innovations that were then systematized and officially credited to male architects and nobles. It's a fascinating kind of historical erasure, not malicious exactly, but systematic and complete. Dr. Nielsen describes visiting a castle in Denmark where she found evidence of 17 different heating methods implemented across different rooms, all developed over about 40 years, all with minor innovations that build on each other. By interviewing locals and examining architectural details, she was able to trace at least 9 of those innovations back to the domestic decisions of the castle's head lady, a person whose name doesn't appear in any official records. Her heating innovations were so effective that they became standard in noble homes across Scandinavia, and yet she's remembered only in the archaeology. This is a pattern that repeats throughout medieval heating history. The innovation happens in kitchens and communal spaces where women maintain fires and manage warmth. The innovation works. It spreads. And then when a nobleman decides the method is valuable enough to scale up to his great hall, suddenly it becomes recorded as his invention. It's a kind of silent erasure that makes studying medieval heating technology into an unexpected exercise in feminist history. Pause. The second person we need to talk about is someone we know a bit more about, Villard de Honnecourt. He was a 13th century architect and engineer from northern France who traveled throughout Europe, and crucially, He documented everything in his notebook. His drawings show sophisticated understanding of heating systems. Though he doesn't explain his reasoning in detail, he was documenting for other architects and craftspeople who already understood the principles. What's remarkable is how his sketches show someone thinking systematically about heat distribution, chimney design, and the relationship between fire location and room temperature. In one sketch, Viller draws a heating system for a noble's chamber that uses a fire positioned not against an exterior wall, which would lose heat, but against an interior wall. The heat is then distributed upward through wall cavities, across the ceiling, and down through another interior wall before exiting through a chimney position at the opposite end of the room. It's designed to maximize the time heat spends in the room. Modern HVAC engineers have analyzed the sketch and confirmed that the design shows sophisticated understanding of thermodynamic principles that shouldn't have been articulated or understood for another 4 or 5 centuries. This is where the genius part really becomes undeniable. We're not talking about trial and error anymore. By the 13th and 14th centuries, medieval builders had developed systematic understanding of how heat moved, how materials retained it, and how to design spaces to maximize thermal efficiency. They were doing this through observation and experimentation, yes, but also through what we now call engineering principles. Pause. So why, if medieval people were figuring this out, aren't we all still using these heating systems? Why did this knowledge essentially disappear? This is where the banning part comes in, and it's genuinely fascinating from a historical perspective. See, these heating systems worked really, really well, so well that they began to threaten existing power structures. The feudal system relied partly on nobles being able to demonstrate visible wealth and comfort. Central heating, the ability to heat large spaces efficiently, became a status symbol. But it was a status symbol that, once you understood the principles, was surprisingly cheap to implement. A clever builder could heat a cottage nearly as effectively as a noble's hall if they understood the core principles. This terrified authorities. Religious authorities, in particular, became concerned. Monasteries and abbeys had traditionally been places where monks deliberately endured physical hardship as part of their spiritual practice. If monks could stay warm in winter easily, where would they find opportunities for the kind of suffering that was supposed to bring them closer to God? So around 1350 in France and parts of Northern Europe, there was an actual effort by church authorities to ban certain heating methods as spiritually dangerous. It sounds ridiculous now, but imagine you were a religious authority and you believe that comfort led to vice and moral decline. An efficient heating system wasn't progress. It was temptation. Similarly, city fire wardens, who were legitimate authorities in medieval cities, became concerned about these new heating methods. They worked too well. They were too efficient. And when something works that efficiently, the fire warden's legitimate concern was that people didn't fully understand them and therefore couldn't safely maintain them. There were real fire risks, but there was also, undoubtedly, some professional defensiveness. If heating became easy and efficient, what role did the fire warden play in a home's survival? By the time the Renaissance rolled around, these medieval heating innovations had been suppressed long enough that they were largely forgotten in Western Europe. The knowledge persisted in Asia and continued to develop there, but in Europe, we essentially had to reinvent radiant heating in the 1800s and make it sound like a modern innovation. It's remarkable. Actually, we took 500-year-old technology, called it progress, and credited it to industrial engineers who had never heard of the medieval people who solved the same problems first. Pause. But here's what I really want you to understand as we move deeper into this story. We're not just talking about heating systems. We're talking about a kind of human intelligence and problem solving that exists outside the framework we use to measure technological progress. Medieval people solved difficult engineering problems with the materials available to them. They did it systematically, though they didn't have the terminology we use now. And then we, meaning modern Western civilization, forgot about it and acted surprised when we had to solve the same problems again. It's a humbling reminder that progress isn't always forward. Sometimes it's sideways. Sometimes it's backward. And sometimes it's just us forgetting what we knew and acting like we've made some breakthrough, when we're actually just catching up to people who figured out centuries ago. As we settle deeper into this story, we're going to enter the daily life of a medieval heat engineer. Someone who might not have had that specific title, but who understood, intuitively and systematically, how to make fire work for human survival. We're going to follow them through their morning, through their work, through their struggles, and through the fascinating, frustrating reality of being someone who knows something that the authorities have decided is forbidden. Pause. Let's begin there, in the dark, in the cold, in a moment before the work starts. Get comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Feel your shoulders sink into whatever's supporting you. The weight of the day, your day, the modern day, with its thermostats and radiators and the simple click of a button to generate heat, all of that is going to drift away. And what we're going to enter instead is the mind of someone who had to solve the problem of warmth without any of those technologies. Someone for whom heat wasn't something you purchased. It was something you engineered with your hands and your mind and your willingness to challenge what the authorities said was possible. Are you ready? Then let's go. You wake before the sun. This is not a choice. This is the reality of winter in the 1380s. And you don't have the luxury of sleeping past the moment your body recognizes that light is beginning to exist somewhere beyond the walls of your home. The room is dark, truly dark, the kind of darkness that exists before electricity, before gas lamps, before anything but a single candle or a dying fire. You can smell the cold. It has a scent, this medieval cold. It's the sharp, mineral smell of stone, the damp decay of fire that burned through the night but has now collapsed into ash, and underneath that, the faintly acrid smell of smoke that's permeated every wooden surface in your home for the past 6 months. Your breath is visible, small clouds of vapor that hang in the air for a moment before dissipating. Your body heat, escaping into an indifferent atmosphere. You've learned not to think too hard about this. The physics of warmth leaving you, of entropy always winning, of the universe's persistent desire to cool everything down to absolute stillness. That kind of thinking will paralyze you on a morning like this. And there's too much work ahead. Pause. You lie still for a moment, gathering your resolve. Your wife is still sleeping beside you, though sleeping might be generous. She's conserving heat, conserving energy, becoming as still as possible. Your children are in the next room. You can't hear them yet, but you know they're there, waiting for the house to warm enough that their small fingers stop aching. This waiting, this anticipation of pain, this is something you've gotten used to. It's not normal, but you've decided it doesn't need to be permanent. The fire has mostly died. There are embers, though. You can see the faintest glow from what used to be a roaring flame 12 hours ago. It's the middle of the night's work. Someone, it might have been you, might have been someone else, fed it before sleep, just enough to keep it alive, but not enough to waste fuel. Fuel is measured out carefully. Every piece of wood is accounted for. Winter is finite. It will end, but fuel is more finite than winter. This is always a calculation. You push back the heavy wool blanket that's been keeping your body heat close. The air at your exposed skin like a physical shock. Your arms have their own small goosebumps. You're already shivering, though you're moving as deliberately as someone can move when they're very cold. The goal is to move fast enough to generate warmth through movement, but not so fast that you waste energy in movements that don't accomplish anything. You've developed an efficient shuffle, not a full stride, because that would require more energy, but a deliberate stepping motion that carries you toward the hearth. The floor is cold, unbelievably cold. Stone, mostly, though in wealthier homes, and yours is moderately comfortable, which is to say you own the space and have more tools than average. There might be a thin layer of straw or rushes. The straw provides some insulation. It also accumulates years of spilled food and human detritus. Medieval floors are like ancient civilizations. Every season adds a layer. Every spring, someone, usually someone poor and desperate for work, comes in and scrapes out some of the accumulated debris. But it's a temporary solution. Pause. You reach the hearth. This is the center of your life in winter, not metaphorically. Literally, the hearth is where your family gathers. It's where you cook. It's where warmth originates. And starting 3 years ago, it's where you began your secret work. The fire is low but manageable. You can still see the structure of what it is. There's a burned log that's mostly ash now, some charcoal that still has heat radiating from it, and underneath, a layer of ash that's insulating the heat from below. You take the poker, an iron rod, handmade by a local blacksmith, one of your most valuable tools, and carefully begin to shift the embers. You're not stirring the fire casually. You're being precise. You're creating space at the bottom of the fire, breaking up the ash layer, allowing air to reach the hottest parts. The poker is heavy. Metal conducts heat readily, and even through your woolen gloves, you can feel the warmth transferring from the fire to the iron to your hands. It's uncomfortable, but not painful. You've learned the exact balance. Another 30 seconds and it would be too hot. Another 30 seconds in the other direction, and you'd be wasting time trying to revive a fire that's already dying. You add kindling, not the heavy logs, yet those go on last. First, there are small branches, split wood that's dry, arranged in a specific pattern that you've practiced 1,000 times. The pattern matters. It matters because it determines how air flows through the nascent fire. Too dense and the fire will smother under its own structure. Too loose and it will burn too quickly and waste the fuel. You found a middle ground. It took you 18 months of experimentation to find it, but now you can do it in the dark, guided by touch and the faintest sense of what the fire needs. Pause. The wood catches. For a moment that feels longer than it actually is, there's only the kindling burning, a small, almost apologetic fire that's barely generating warmth. But it's releasing smoke, and that smoke is beginning to rise, beginning to find its way toward the chimney system you've been secretly building inside your walls for the past 3 years. This is the part you can't explain to anyone. The system wouldn't exist if authorities knew about it. Fire wardens have explicit rules about what heating systems are permitted. Priests have written letters, circulated among parishes, identifying certain heating methods as spiritually dangerous. And yet, here you are, feeding a fire that about to interact with a heating system that exists partially inside your walls, a system that violates all of those prohibitions. You're not afraid of the fire itself. You know fire. You've lived with it your entire life. What you're afraid of is a discovery. The shame of being told your system is dangerous when you know, with absolute certainty, that it's the opposite. The humiliation of having your walls broken open and your innovation exposed as heresy. But it's too late to regret it now. The system exists. The fire is rising. In approximately 4 minutes, the heat will begin its journey through channels you carved into the stone walls of your home, and your family will experience a warmth that shouldn't, according to all current wisdom, be possible without a roaring fire burning their eyes and lungs into submission. More wood. These are larger pieces, thumb-thick branches and split logs. You add them with care, in a specific pattern that ensures maximum surface area exposure to the oxygen-rich air flowing through the bottom of the fire. The fire rises higher. The smoke increases, and then you activate the system. There's a small wooden door, almost invisible unless you know it's there, built into the side of your hearth. It looks like it might be a decorative feature, a natural part of the stone structure. You slide it open, revealing the entrance to the first channel. Hot air begins to rush in immediately, seeking the path of least resistance, flowing into the cavity system you created. Pause. The satisfaction of this moment, watching the system activate, knowing that it's working, that the physics you intuited are actually manifesting in reality, it's profound. It's also terrifying. If someone walks in, if someone sees the door, if someone understands what you've done, you seal the door. Now the system is working without visible evidence. If someone enters a room, they'll see a normal fire, a normal hearth, nothing unusual. But they'll also notice, after a while, that the house is warmer than a house with just this fire should be. They might comment on it. They might ask, and then you'll have to lie or somehow explain away or act like you haven't noticed anything unusual. You haven't told your wife everything. You've told her enough so that she won't accidentally reveal something, but you haven't told her about all the false walls, all the channels, all the hours you spent carving stone you don't actually own, because technically the owner is a noble who rarely visits. She knows the house is warmer. She's grateful. She's also terrified, in a different way than you're terrified, because she understands the social implications better than you do. A woman's reputation depends on obedience, on accepting authority, on not living in a home that violates the rules. But she's also a mother, and her children are warm now, so her terror is tempered by something stronger. Pause. The fire is fully established now. It's been about 12 minutes since you woke, though time moves strangely in the dark and cold. The smoke is flowing properly. You can tell because the air in the room is getting warmer, and your eyes aren't watering as much as they used to. Before the system was in place, a fire this size in a closed space would generate an enormous amount of ambient smoke. The smoke would rise erratically, mixing with the room's air, forcing everyone to breathe it until their lungs adapted to constant irritation. Now, most of the smoke is being captured and directed upward through channels you've carefully engineered. The result is that the room is getting warmer, without getting smokier. It's subtle. But if you live in a world where you're used to choosing between warmth and breathable air, it's revolutionary. You take a moment to wash your hands. There's water, cold water from a barrel, and soap made from animal fat and ash. The soap is harsh. It cracks your hands further, but the washing is more about ritual than actual cleanliness. It's a transition moment. You've done the essential work of the morning. You've activated the system. You've ensured that heat is flowing for the walls of your home. Now you have to prepare for the rest of the day. Your wife stirs. She's hearing the fire, understanding that the initial danger of the morning is past, that the house will be warm enough to emerge from a blanket without immediately freezing. She rises more slowly than you did. Her body is used to a different kind of work, and cold affects her differently. Or maybe she's just more careful about how she moves, more aware of the need to conserve and pace. Your children emerge. There's no particular alarm clock. They know by instinct when it's safe to get up, when the house is warmed enough. They're small and almost entirely unself-conscious. They move toward the fire without thinking. This is their world. They don't know that other families are currently huddled under blankets, breathing smoke, making the choice between warmth and breathable air. Pause. The morning settles into something resembling routine. There's breakfast, bread, mostly, saved from yesterday, slightly hardened by age and cold, softened now by the heat from the fire, or chewed vigorously by teeth that are still young enough to handle the assault. There's weak ale, because water isn't safe, and this is safer than you'd think. There's the endless sense of needing more food, always more, because the body's energy requirements increase in the cold. And there's the waiting for the system to do its work, the waiting for the full heat to develop, the waiting for the moment when you can access the deeper chambers you've created, the ones hidden behind the walls, the ones where you've been experimenting with secondary innovations that might make the system even better. This waiting is its own kind of meditation. You've learned not to hurry it. Patience is a tool just as much as a poker is. The system will heat the house as fast as it can. Rushing won't accelerate it. So instead, you sit, you eat. You observe your family becoming gradually warmer, more mobile, more themselves. Your youngest, maybe 5 or 6, you're not entirely sure because age is tracked differently, begins to ask questions. Why is the house so warm today? Did you do something different? The questions are innocent, from the perspective of a child who doesn't understand the concept of dangerous innovation. You give vague answers. You tell her that the fire is burning well today. You tell her that sometimes, when you're patient and careful, things work the way they're supposed to work. She seems satisfied. She returns to her breakfast. And you're alone again in your own head, thinking about the rest of the day, the work that needs to happen, the small adjustments you want to make to the system, the constantly evolving calculations about how much heat is being generated versus how much fuel is being consumed. Pause. The morning stretches. It's still dark outside, but the quality of darkness is changing. Somewhere beyond your walls, the sun is rising. You can't see it yet, but you can feel it in a kind of atmospheric shift. The world is transitioning from night to day, from the coldest hours to the slightly less cold hours, from one phase of winter to the next. And you're about to move into the work phase, the practical phase, the time when you take the heat that the system is generating and direct it toward the small innovations that might, over time, transform the way humans experience winter. Are you ready? Then let's move deeper. The work begins with the hands. Before you touch any of the specialized equipment, you move to a shelf carved into the stone wall of your home, a shelf you carve yourself, which is technically against building codes, but which you've carefully disguised as a natural feature of the wall's geology. On this shelf sit your primary tools. They're humble, mostly. A hammer made from stone wrapped in leather. A chisel made from iron, curved, designed for working into tight spaces. A measuring cord made from knotted twine, where each knot represents a specific distance. And your most precious possession, a metal saw. The saw is beautiful in a purely functional way. It's handmade, which means it's not perfect, but it's effective. The teeth are irregular, which actually helps them bite into different materials. You salvage it from an old workshop that burned down 3 years ago, before you began this heating work. It cost you 3 months of labor trades, but was worth it because a metal saw opens possibilities that are unavailable with stone tools alone. Pause. You run your hand along the saw's edge. You're not checking sharpness. You're too experienced to need that. You're checking the set of the teeth, the angle at which they're mounted. A saw is only valuable if it's properly maintained. You've learned to sharpen this yourself by watching a blacksmith for exactly 2 hours and then figuring out the rest through trial and error. The trial and error part involved 3 broken saw blades and 1 nearly severed finger before you understood the correct angle of approach. The scar on your left hand is still visible. It healed badly because you couldn't seek proper medical attention. That would involve explaining the accident, and you couldn't risk having someone notice the types of materials your hands were callous from working with. So you bandaged it yourself, kept it clean by medieval standards, and waited for it to heal without infection. It did, mostly. The scar pulls slightly when you make certain motions, but it's functional, which is what matters. You check the rest of your tools with the care of someone who understands that these objects are the difference between productivity and failure. The hammerstone is securely wrapped. The chisels are aligned properly. You have a leather pouch with smaller implements. Scribing tools made from bird bones, measuring instruments fashioned from metal scraps, brushes made from animal hair. Everything has a purpose. Everything is maintained. Next, you move to your materials. This is the part that requires the most caution. The materials you use for your heating system construction are not officially available to you. Stone, technically, belongs to the property owner. Clay you can access from a creek about a mile away if you're careful, and you go at night. Iron scraps you trade for through a complex network of people. A blacksmith who throws away material he considers unsuitable, a construction site where you retrieve fallen nails, a smith's wife who trades you bits of metal in exchange for heat. Not heat from your system. She doesn't know about that. But warmth. The simple act of standing near your fire in the winter and drinking hot water. That kind of exchange. Pause. The clay is your primary material today. You've been experimenting with clay formulations for months now, testing different ratios of clay to sand to ash. The ash is crucial. Medieval clay workers discovered centuries ago that adding ash to clay creates a stronger, more thermally stable ceramic. You don't know the chemistry behind it. That won't be formally explained for another 400 or 500 years. But you understand, through observation, that ash-enhanced clay performs differently. It cracks less. It holds heat better. It's easier to shape. You have samples. You've lined them up along a shelf, and each one is labeled with a tiny mark system that only you understand. The mark indicates the proportions. 1 line means 1 part clay to 2 parts sand. 2 lines means a different ratio. 3 lines means you've added extra ash. You're testing to find the optimal combination, the mixture that balances workability with thermal efficiency with longevity. This is not recorded anywhere. You haven't written it down because literacy is limited in your community, and written records of experiments like this would be even more incriminating than the system itself. So you keep it in your head, and you transfer knowledge through the work itself. You show your hands what the correct clay feels like. You teach your muscle memory to recognize good material. The clay today is a 3-line mixture. You've been using it for the last 6 weeks, and you're ready to test it in an actual installation. This is the risky part. You're going to carve a new chamber into a wall that currently forms part of the boundary between your space and a neighbor's. The neighbor's side will be untouched. They'll never know. But your side is going to have a carefully hidden clay line channel that will direct hot air in a new direction. You've spent weeks planning this installation. You know the stone topology of the wall down to small details. You know where the weak points are, where the stone is fractured and can be carefully separated. You know where you can work at night, without making noise that will alert neighbors. You know the exact dimensions of the channel you're going to create, measured and remeasured until you're certain. Pause. But before you do the installation, you need to prepare the clay. The preparation is meditative if you allow yourself to experience it that way. You take the clay. It's been stored wrapped in damp fabric to keep it moist but not wet. And you begin to work it with your hands. You're breaking down air pockets. You're redistributing the moisture evenly. You're establishing a kind of internal consistency that will determine how the clay behaves when it dries. The work of your hands is rhythmic. Fold, press, fold, press. The clay gradually becomes more uniform, more responsive. You can feel the moment when it reaches the right consistency, when it's neither too dry nor too wet, when it will hold shape but won't crack as it dries. This is where the X works suspiciously well formula becomes relevant, because clay is suspicious. It shouldn't work this well. It's just dirt. It's just earth. But in the hands of someone who understands it, understands the relationship between moisture and temperature and pressure, it becomes a building material that rivals anything else available. And yet, people treat it casually. They assume it's simple. The assumption is wrong. You work the clay for maybe 30 minutes. By the time you're finished, your hands are stained. They're always stained now. The clay has literally worked its way into the creases of your palms. And the material is ready. You shape it into blocks, not rectangular blocks, because those aren't what you need. You're shaping them into curved pieces that will fit together along the wall's interior, creating a smooth channel for hot air to flow through. Pause. The shaping requires focus. Each piece needs to fit precisely with the pieces adjacent to it. There can be no gaps that would allow air to escape sideways when it should be flowing forward. There can be no protrusions that would obstruct the flow. You're essentially sculpting the internal structure of your heating system, one piece of clay at a time. It takes about 3 hours. By the time you're finished, your hands are cramping, your back is sore from bending over your work, and you have 11 curved clay pieces that are ready to be installed. You've set them on a shelf to begin drying slightly. They need to be firm enough to handle, but not so dry that they'll crack when positioned. While they're resting, you move to the next phase, accessing the wall space where you'll install them. This is where the actual stonework comes in. The access point you've chosen is hidden behind a bench, a functional piece of furniture that's been in your home for years. To anyone observing, you're just moving furniture around. To you, you're exposing a section of wall where you need to work. The stone is exactly as you expected, rough with specific fracture patterns you've memorized. You use the saw to score along a plan line, creating a weak point where you can eventually push the stone away from the wall. The saw moves in short, controlled strokes. The sound is minimal, a soft scraping rather than a loud scratching. You work slowly, deliberately, knowing that speed here would compromise control. The sound is almost hypnotic. Score, score, score. The saw moves back and forth. The line becomes deeper. The effort is significant. Stone is hard, and the saw has responded to centuries of medieval engineering, which means it's well made but not high-tech. But the work is achievable. You're not trying to cut through the entire stone. You're trying to score it deeply enough that you can use leverage to separate it. Pause. An hour of sawing creates a line deep enough. You position the chisel at the scored line, and using the hammer, you begin to tap gently. The goal is not to smash, but to leverage. The tap travels through the chisel, travels through the scored line, and creates a minute separation between the stone and the mortar holding it in place. You tap again. Again. The separation increases by millimeters with each strike. Eventually, and eventually here means about 30 taps over maybe 10 minutes, the stone gives way. It's not a dramatic collapse. It's a gradual yielding, until finally, the stone is loose enough that you can pry it out. It's heavy. Stones are heavy, and moving it requires you to shift your grip multiple times, to reposition yourself, to avoid crushing your fingers or straining your back beyond the point of recovery. But you get it out. There's a hole now, an opening into the internal space of the wall. This is the critical moment. You can see inside the wall. You can see the depth of the space, the way the stones are arranged, the patterns of dust and debris that have accumulated over decades. And you can see that your calculations were correct. The space is exactly deep enough for your clay channel to fit. It's going to work. You rest for a moment. This is allowed. You're not wasting time. You're recovering enough energy to do the precise work that comes next. Putting the clay pieces in place requires not just strength but exact positioning, and you need your hands to be steady and your mind to be clear. Pause. The first piece of clay goes in carefully. It seats into prepared space with a satisfaction that you feel in your chest. It's in the right position. You can already imagine the hot air flowing through this channel, being directed exactly where you want it to go. The second piece connects to the first, the third to the second. One by one, your curved clay pieces create a seamless channel inside the wall. By the time you've installed all 11 pieces, it's late afternoon. You've been working since the morning, and the quality of light coming through the small window has shifted entirely. The sun is low now, approaching the horizon. Soon it will be evening, and you'll need to finish the installation and restore the visible stone to its original position before anyone returns home or wonders why you're spending so much time on construction work. The final step is sealing the opening. You take mortar, a mixture of lime and sand, and you carefully seal the space around the clay channel, ensuring that no air can leak sideways where it shouldn't. The mortar work is delicate. It needs to be smooth enough to be invisible, but rough enough to bond properly with the stone. You work with your hands at first, then with a small smoothing tool made from bone. As the mortar sets slightly, you position the original stone back into place. It doesn't fit perfectly anymore. The mortar around it is still soft, but it's close enough. Once the mortar fully hardens, no one will be able to tell that the stone has been disturbed. The modification will be internal. The effect will be subtle but measurable. More even heat distribution, slightly better airflow, incremental improvements to the overall system. Pause. By the time you're finished, your hands are shaking slightly with fatigue. You've used every muscle. You focus with an intensity that's been building for weeks. And now it's complete, at least this phase of it. You restore the bench to its original position. You gather your tools and store them back on the hidden shelf. You clean the mortar dust from visible surfaces. You extinguish the work lights and return to the normal state of the room, just a home with a family, a fire, and a system of heat distribution that everyone can feel working but no one can see. Your wife comes in as you're finishing. She doesn't ask questions. She never does. But she looks at you with an expression that's part concern and part understanding. She knows you've been working. She knows the house is warmer because of it. And she knows that you're taking risks, though she's chosen not to know exactly what those risks are. The children are hungry. Dinner needs to happen. The fire needs tending. Life continues, even in the midst of secret work, even while living in violation of authorities' rules, even while you're certain that eventually someone will figure out what you've done, but not today. Today, you've built something. Something that will outlast you, probably something that future generations might not even recognize as intentional innovation, but which will make their lives warmer. And that's enough. The heat is tangible now. It's been 2 weeks since you installed the last clay channel, and the system has had time to fully activate and integrate. You can walk through your home and feel the difference, not just in temperature, but in the consistency of temperature. There are no more pockets of cold air. There are no more places where you have to choose between staying warm and breathing. Let's be precise about what you've actually created. It's not a furnace. It's not a central heating system like modern homes would understand them. It's a series of interconnected channels, most of them hidden inside your walls, that capture heat from the fire and redistribute it throughout the living space. The heat isn't forced through by pumps or fans. You don't have any of those. Instead, it moves through convection, through the principle that hot air naturally rises, and that clever design can direct that rising air along specific paths rather than letting it escape randomly. The outputs of this system are difficult to measure in medieval terms, but let's try anyway. Your home currently consumes approximately 30% less firewood than equivalent homes in your area. That's not a small amount. That's the difference between a family having enough fuel to make it through winter and a family running out in February and either burning furniture or moving in with relatives. Your family still has fuel left when spring arrives. This fact alone would be extraordinary if you could explain it. Secondarily, the system creates measurable improvement in health. Your children's respiratory systems are markedly better. They're not coughing constantly. Their eyes don't run and stream from smoke irritation. They're not spending half the winter in a state of low-level respiratory infection, which was the baseline before. This improvement is subtle enough that outsiders might attribute it to coincidence, but you and your family understand the truth. The absence of smoke inhalation is creating measurable improvement in survival rates. Pause. There's also an output that you're noticing only now, after 2 weeks of consistent heat. Productivity. Your wife is able to do domestic work more efficiently when her hands aren't numb. The children can be taught skills when they're not suffering from cold. You yourself can do detailed work in the evening by firelight without your hands being too frozen to maintain fine motor control. The heat doesn't just keep everyone alive. It enables them to be more skilled, more capable, more human. But here's the part that's creating the most interesting output. People are noticing. They're not noticing the system. That remains hidden, thankfully, but they're noticing the effects. The baker commented that your bread consumption has decreased, which suggests you're not using your hearth constantly to keep warm. The village healer asked if someone in your family had recovered from a chronic illness because you're not visiting him for respiratory treatment anymore. A neighbor, casually, mentioned that your home seems unusually temperate for this season. These comments are made innocently, but they're dangerous because they're attention. Attention is the thing you've been most trying to avoid, and yet, the better your system works, the harder it is to avoid attention. The results of good engineering are visible to everyone, even if the engineering itself remains hidden. You've begun to think about the larger implications. If your system works, and it clearly does, what would happen if other people knew about it? What if this knowledge spread? What if, within a generation, everyone in this region had similar systems, and the medieval relationship with winter completely changed? The thought is exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Pause. A man comes to your door on a morning in late February. He's a stranger, or at least someone you don't know, though his clothes suggest he's moderately wealthy. He carries himself with a kind of authority that makes you immediately nervous. He's the kind of person who notices things. He explains, over weak tea by your fire, that he's an agent for the bishop. He's traveling through the region, and he's heard reports of unusual heating methods in certain homes. He's not accusing anyone of anything. He's simply investigating, being thorough, making sure people are following the church's guidelines on appropriate heating practices. Your heart is operating at a pace slightly faster than baseline, but you've been prepared for this conversation in a mental way. You have a story ready. You explain that yes, your home is warmer than might be expected. You attribute it to careful fire management. You become more efficient at building fires, more disciplined about maintaining them. You've also, you mention, invested in better materials for your chimney, which draws smoke more effectively. The combination of small improvements has resulted in a perceptibly warmer environment. Nothing radical, nothing that violates any rules. Just the result of careful attention to detail. He listens. He observes. He walks around your home, feeling the walls, noting the temperature consistency, asking specific questions about which direction your fire faces and how you've arranged your chimney. You answer everything truthfully except for the crucial parts, which you omit. The system exists, but you don't mention it. The clay channels are embedded in your walls, but you talk instead about insulation and efficient fire tending. By the time he leaves, you don't know if you fooled him, but he hasn't accused you of anything, and he hasn't demanded access to your walls. He's thanked you for your hospitality and moved on to the next house. After he's gone, you spend 20 minutes simply sitting by the fire, feeling the warmth that you've built, accepting that you might be discovered at any moment and that your system might be destroyed or banned or attributed to witchcraft. But the output remains warmth, human comfort, the ability to survive winter with greater ease. Pause. A woman arrives at your door the following week. She's elderly and she walks with a cane, and there's something about her that seems vaguely official but not church official. She's wealthy enough that you initially wonder if she's someone important. But her first question disarms you. Someone told me your house is warm. I'd like to understand why. She asks this in a way that suggests she's not reporting you. She's curious. She's intelligent. She's observing the outputs of your system and trying to understand the inputs. You tell her less of the story you told the church agent. You tell her more of the truth, but still not all of it. You mention the clay channels. You mention efficient fire design. You mention experimentation and observation. She nods slowly, and then she asks you a question that changes something in you. Can you teach me? This question has layers. She's asking if you can transfer knowledge. She's asking if you're willing to risk the additional danger of bringing someone else into your secret. She's asking implicitly if you believe in what you've built enough to share it. You think about it. You think about the isolation of being the only person in your region who understands this technology. You think about what happens if you die suddenly and all this knowledge dies with you. You think about the outputs, the warmth, the health improvements, the productivity gains, and how those outputs could be multiplied if more people could create similar systems. Yes, you say, I can teach you. Pause. Teaching begins that afternoon. It's not a formal education. You don't have a classroom, but you show her the hidden clay channels. You show her how the system captures heat. You explain the principles as you understand them. Hot air rises. Thermal mass retains heat. Careful design directs airflow efficiently. She understands quickly. She's built things before. She's worked with materials. She's not trained in the way a mason might be trained, but she has the fundamental capability to learn. By the next week, she's had her own system partially installed in a room of her home. It's smaller than yours, adapted to her needs, but it follows the same principles. The outputs are similar. More warmth, less fuel consumption, better air quality. A month later, she's taught a friend. That friend is teaching another person. The knowledge is spreading slowly, carefully, under the surface of official awareness. You're terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. What you've created is not just a heating system. It's a model for knowledge transfer. It's proof that innovation can exist outside official channels. It's a challenge, though you'd never articulate it this way, to the assumption that progress comes from authorities and gets distributed downward to regular people. The output of your work, it turns out, is revolutionary. Not immediately. Not in a way that anyone is going to document in history books. But in the small ways that matter. In the number of people who survive winter in better health. In the fuel that's not wasted. In the knowledge that another way is possible. Pause. The bishop's agent comes back 3 months later. He's heard additional reports. He's concerned. But he's also puzzled because he can't find evidence of anything explicitly prohibited. The heating systems he's discovering in various homes are innovative, yes, but they don't violate the specific rules that have been set down. They're not witchcraft. They're not demonic. They're just better engineering than anyone expected peasants to be capable of. He interrogates you again, more seriously this time. He demands to see your walls. You show him the visible features. The improved chimney, the position hearth. You don't show him the hidden clay channels because you've actually covered them once you realize someone was investigating. With an additional layer of stone that appears entirely natural. The system still works. The channels are still directing heat, but they're invisible now. He leaves frustrated. He reports, you later hear through a complicated series of information trades, that heating innovation in the region is suspiciously widespread, but insufficient evidence of prohibited methods. The church issues a stronger condemnation of certain heating practices, but without specific details about what's actually prohibited beyond methods that create excessive comfort, which is vague enough that almost any innovation can be defended as not excessive. The output of his investigation is the opposite of what he intended. Instead of suppressing heating innovation, he's inadvertently forced the innovators to become more careful and more sophisticated. The systems are hidden more thoroughly. The knowledge transfer is more selective. The innovation continues but becomes more secure against detection. You remember your first year of this work. It was not glorious. It was failure after failure, each one more expensive than the last because every failed experiment consumed materials and time that you couldn't spare. Your first attempt at creating a heat distributing channel was with wood. You carved a wooden tunnel, sealed it against your interior wall, and waited for the heat to flow through it as you imagined it would. What actually happened was the wood began to char almost immediately. The heat was too intense. The wood didn't have thermal properties sufficient to channel heat without being damaged by it. You had to spend a week carefully dismantling the entire system to prevent an actual fire. The second attempt was with clay, but clay that you hadn't properly prepared. You'd added water too late, and the clay never achieved proper consistency. It developed massive cracks as it dried, and those cracks became channels for heat to escape sideways rather than flowing where you wanted it to. It still provided some warmth, but not the controlled warmth you were seeking. Pause. Your mentor during this period was a man named Jacob, though he would never claim that title. He was a mason by profession, and he'd mentioned casually one evening, while drinking at the tavern, that he'd heard stories about medieval engineers in distant places creating heating systems that worked better than they should. He said it in a way that suggested he was joking, but you understood, in a way that people sometimes do, that he was actually testing whether you were interested in this kind of information. You began to ask him specific questions about materials, about heat transfer, about the behavior of clay under thermal stress. He answered carefully, never quite confirming that he was actually giving you a roadmap for engineering, but making it obvious enough that someone listening carefully could follow the implications. After about 3 months of these careful conversations, he asked to see what you were doing. You were terrified. You were still failing. You had wasted significant resources. But you showed him your wall, the one that currently had the charred wooden tunnel, and the cracked clay attempt, and the evidence of your fundamental misunderstanding. He observed for a long time. Then he said something that changed your approach. The materials aren't failing. Your respect for them is failing. You're trying to force heat through a path. Instead, you should be asking what the heat wants to do, and then making a path that the heat is happy to follow. That's not the language he used exactly. He was a medieval mason, not a modern thermodynamicist, but that's the essential principle he was conveying. Heat wants to rise. Heat wants to follow the path of least resistance. Heat dissipates unless you give a container that encourages it to stay collected. So instead of trying to force heat through a tunnel, you should create a system that heat naturally flows through. This reframing changed everything. Pause. With this understanding, you began experimenting with form. You curved the channels instead of making them straight, because curved paths don't create turbulence the way sharp angles do. You created a hierarchy of channels, a main channel for the hottest air, secondary channel for warmer air, exit points position, so that air can flow downward as well as upward, creating circulation rather than just rising and escaping. You tested clay formulations with Jacob's guidance. He helped you understand why ash strengthens clay, why certain sand-to-clay ratios create structural stability, why the firing process, if you could achieve it, would dramatically improve durability. You couldn't fire the clay yourself. So instead, you developed methods of coating it with protective layer that wouldn't burn in the presence of the heat it needed to channel. The learning process took almost a year. During that year, you failed repeatedly. You created channels that didn't connect properly. You designed curves that were too tight, creating air resistance rather than flow. You installed systems that worked partially but created uneven heating that was sometimes worse than having no system at all. But with each failure, you learned something. Each mistake became a data point. Each problem became a puzzle with a specific solution. By the time your system was finally working, truly working, not just partially working, you had accumulated a body of practical knowledge about heating engineering that would probably not be formally articulated in academic terms for another 5 centuries. Pause. Jacob died during that learning year. It was sudden, a lung illness that took him in about 2 weeks. You attended his funeral and felt like you were saying goodbye to someone without whom you wouldn't have understood the principles that were saving your family from winter suffering. But his legacy was embedded in your knowledge. When you taught the elderly woman, when she taught her friend, when that friend taught others, all of that knowledge originated with Jacob, a man whose name no one would remember, whose contribution would never be documented, but whose guidance had essentially launched a regional innovation in heating technology. You tried to visit his widow, to offer some kind of condolence or payment for the knowledge he'd given you. She wasn't interested in payment, she said, but she was curious about what you'd learned. So you ended up teaching her too, in a way, though she never built a heating system herself. But she understood enough to appreciate what her husband had helped you create, and that seemed important. The learning never really stops. Even now, years into the work, you're still experimenting. You're still discovering better formulations, more efficient channel designs, improved methods of heat distribution. The system that seemed revolutionary 5 years ago seems obvious now, and you're working on next generation improvements that you haven't quite figured out yet. This is the actual nature of apprenticeship. It's not a moment when you go from incompetent to competent. It's a process that continues throughout your life, where each problem solved reveals three new problems that need solving, and each new solution requires learning things you didn't know you needed to know. Pause. The gap between your initial ideal, a perfect heating system that would work immediately, and your actual reality, a series of approximations, failures, and incremental improvements, is where most of life lives, actually. This is a principle you learn through engineering, but that seems to apply to everything else. People imagine they'll be parents and immediately understand how to raise children. They imagine they'll be craftspeople and immediately create masterpieces. They imagine they'll be wise and immediately understand how to navigate difficult situations. None of that is how it actually works. What actually works is that you show up, you fail, you learn, you adjust, you try again, you fail differently, you learn something new, and over time, 5 years, 10 years, a lifetime, you develop genuine skill, not because you were naturally talented, but because you were willing to be incompetent in public repeatedly until you became competent. This knowledge, this acceptance of the necessity of failure, becomes something you want to pass on when you teach others about heating systems. You don't hide your early mistakes. You tell them about the charred wood, the cracked clay, the systems that worked partially and created new problems. You want them to understand that the genius in heating engineering isn't a moment of inspiration. It's discipline. It's observation. It's willingness to fail repeatedly in the pursuit of something that matters. And it works sometimes. Some of your students become genuinely skilled at creating heating systems. Others lose interest or get discouraged. But enough of them persist that the knowledge is spreading, and the spreading is ensuring that your early mistakes aren't repeated. The next generation of heating engineers will start from a higher baseline than you did because you documented your failures and they learned from them. That's how progress actually works, not through sudden genius, but through the accumulated wisdom of people who failed, learned, and passed the knowledge forward. Your hands hurt. This is not a dramatic pain. It's a chronic ache that's been present for years now, a kind of baseline condition that you've learned to work through. The pain originates from 100 small injuries. Cuts from sharp stone, burns from accidental contact with hot materials, strain from repetitive motions, and a general wearing down of joints that were never designed to work with stone at this intensity. Pause. The fingers are the first casualty. Your index and middle fingers on your left hand are permanently curved slightly, a result of severe burn that happened in year 2 of this work. You were testing a heat-resistant mixture, and your hand slipped into a channel that was hotter than you expected. The skin burned badly enough that when it healed, the scarring pulled the tendon slightly. You can still make a fist, still work, but there's a sensation of tightness that never completely goes away. Your palms are calloused so heavily that people notice. You wear gloves whenever possible, not just for protection from work, but to hide the evidence of what you've been doing. Your wife has asked, carefully, if your hands being in this condition is something you need to address. You've told her it's just the work, the normal results of your profession, but you both know there's something else, something you can't quite articulate without revealing the system. The lower back is another casualty. You're spending 6 to 8 hours a day bent over, working on systems that are positioned at hip height or below. The initial pain from years ago was sharp and incapacitating. Now the dull throb that intensifies by evening, a constant reminder that your body is being slowly worn down by the work that's warming your home. Pause. There are days, increasingly frequent days, when you wake up and the pain is significant enough that you consider stopping. You consider saying that you've made a mistake, that this heating system was a foolish venture, that you should return to conventional heating methods and accept the suffering that everyone else accepts. These moments usually pass, but they're more frequent than they used to be. Your wife watches you in the morning as you stretch, trying to loosen muscles that have tightened overnight. She offers remedies, an herbal mixture, a poultice, rest. But rest is impossible if you're going to maintain the system and continue teaching others. So you accept the pain as part cost, and you wake up the next morning and do it again. The respiratory system is also changing. You're spending so much time in stone dust, in clay dust, in the particulate matter that comes from cutting and shaping and grinding materials. You're not sick, not with any formal illness, but there's a persistent awareness of your lungs being slightly less clear than they should be. You cough more than you used to. You get winded more easily. You assume this is temporary, will improve once you stop doing this work. But you also know, somewhere in a part of you that understands reality clearly, that damage to the lungs is often permanent. Pause. There's also the emotional toll, which weighs more than the physical toll some days. You're living with a constant awareness that you're breaking rules. You're violating authority. You're creating something that the church has explicitly condemned. On rational days, you understand that the condemnation is based in ignorance. The church is trying to enforce suffering as a spiritual practice. But on other days, you wonder if they might have a point. If comfort leads to vice. If innovation leads to pride. If you're creating something that will harm your soul even as it warms your body. These are dark thoughts. They come usually in the evening when you're tired and in pain. When the system is working well enough that there's nothing to do but sit and think about what you've committed to. You usually work through them by reminding yourself of the outputs, the children who aren't sick, the resources saved, the knowledge spreading. But the doubt returns regularly. There's also the specific fear of discovery. You're aware that any day someone might come to your door and demand to see your walls. Any day, someone might understand what you've done and report you. You've heard stories secondhand, thirdhand, of people being punished for heating system innovations. A woman in the next valley who had her home burned, supposedly because her heating method was deemed witchcraft. A monk who was excommunicated because he was secretly improving the heating in the monastery. You don't know if these stories are true, but you believe they're possible. The weight of this fear is real. It affects how you interact with neighbors. It makes you suspicious of strangers. It means you can never fully relax, never fully celebrate the success of what you built, because the success is always temporary, always contingent on not being discovered. Pause. Your children don't notice the pain. They notice the warmth, the absence of smoke, the ability to sit comfortably by the fire without their eyes watering. They notice that they're healthier. They don't notice what their father is sacrificing to create these conditions. This is probably how it should be. But sometimes you're aware of the asymmetry. You're carrying a burden that they'll never fully understand, that they'll only understand if they grow up and become inventors themselves and start paying the cost that innovation demands. The pain, the fear, the physical toll, these are the real costs of the heating system, not the materials, which are ultimately replaceable, not the time, which is ultimately just time, but the damage to your body, the strain on your mind, the constant awareness of risk. This is the thing they never tell you about innovation. They tell you about the elegance of the design, the efficiency of the system, the improvement to human comfort. They don't tell you about the hands that become gnarled, the lungs that fill with stone dust, the mind that never stops worrying about discovery. But you do it anyway, because the output, the warmth, the health, the knowledge spreading, is worth more than the cost, even when the cost is your hands, your back, your lungs, your peace of mind. People know something is different about you, even if they don't know what exactly it is. You move differently than other craftspeople. You carry yourself with a kind of secret knowledge. You talk about heating in ways that suggest you understand something that others don't. And people respond to this in complex ways. Pause. In the market, the blacksmith treats you with respect that he wouldn't normally extend to someone of your social rank. You've never explicitly asked him about the metal scraps you need for your tools, but he saves them for you, and the price you pay is less than fair value. This is his way of acknowledging that you're doing something he respects, even if he's not entirely sure what it is. The miller is different. The miller is suspicious. He's noticed that your fuel consumption is abnormally low, and he speculated, to others, though word eventually gets back to you, that you might be using some kind of heretical heating method. He's not openly accusing you, but he's watching. He's waiting for evidence that would justify reporting you to authorities. The healer has become something close to a friend. Your family's improving health has meant you're no longer customers for her respiratory remedies, which is a loss of income. But she's intelligent enough to understand that what you're doing is fundamentally beneficial, and she started referring people to you quietly. If someone's struggling with heating during winter, she suggests that they seek advice from that clever person who understands fire. She's not explicitly endorsing your system, but she's creating a path for people to find you. Your wife exists in a complex social position. The wives of other craftspeople treat her differently. She has status that comes from your reputation. You're known for skill and innovation, but she also has suspicion attached to her. Is she part of something forbidden? Is her home warmer than it should be? She navigates this by being charming and careful, by never explicitly discussing your heating system, by allowing people to speculate without confirming anything. Pause. The village priest has become, unexpectedly, one of your defenders. He's a thoughtful man, more interested in the welfare of his parishioners than in rigid rule enforcement. He's noticed that heating innovation in the village correlates with better health outcomes, fewer winter deaths, and overall improvement in people's capacity to survive the season. He's also noticed that the bishop's agents haven't been able to identify specific violations, which means they can't actively suppress the work. So, he's essentially chosen to look the other way while privately encouraging innovation in heating. This position is risky for him. If the bishop decides to crack down seriously, the priest could be in trouble for not enforcing the church's rules. But he's made a calculation that the welfare of his actual parishioners matters more than strict obedience to distant authority, and he's willing to bear the risk of that choice. The children of the village now know who you are. They know that that person with the heating systems is someone important, someone whose innovations are spreading. They talk about you in the casual way that children do, without filter. The heating person is over at the widow's house. The heating person is teaching someone new. This casual visibility is both good and bad. Good because it spreads information and creates a kind of public knowledge that makes formal suppression harder. Bad because it increases the chance of discovery. Pause. Reputation is a strange thing. 100 years ago, in a feudal society, reputation was often synonymous with formal status. If the church said you were a healer, you were a healer. If the nobles said you were a craftsperson, you were a craftsperson. But in your case, you're developing a kind of reputation that exists outside formal structures. You're known as the person who understands heating, among a growing network of people who've either adopted your system or learned from it. This informal reputation creates informal status. People defer to you. People ask your opinion about matters beyond heating, about materials, about building, about how to solve problems. You're becoming something like an engineer, though no one uses that word yet. But the role is emerging. It's becoming clear that there are people who understand systems and principles and can solve problems that others can't. The irony is that this status is precisely what makes you more vulnerable. The more people know about your reputation, the more likely it is that someone with power will take notice and decide you're a problem that needs to be addressed. You're aware of this irony. You talk about it with Jacob's widow sometimes. When you visit her, she points out that you're already exposed anyway. So try to hide now is probably ineffective. Better to lean into the reputation, to become enough of a public figure that you can't be quietly suppressed. If you become invisible, you become vulnerable to disappearing without anyone noticing. If you become visible, well, then authorities have to act publicly, which is harder. Pause. This logic is comforting and terrifying simultaneously. There's also the question of credit and attribution. You're inventing heating systems, but you're doing it in a context where innovation is seen as individual rather than collective. When the widow learns your techniques, when she shares it with a friend, when that friend teaches others, at what point does your innovation become community knowledge? When does it become culture rather than individual invention? This question matters because it affects how the work is remembered, if it's remembered at all. If heating innovation becomes attributed to a single person, you, then when you die, people might remember your work as something unique and brilliant but inimitable. But if it becomes something that many people understand and practice, then it becomes resilient. It survives you. It becomes normal rather than exceptional. You're beginning to lean toward the second option. You're teaching more people, documenting the principles more carefully. Try and create a situation where heating innovation isn't dependent on you. This means sharing credit, which is the opposite of ego, but it also means creating something that outlasts you, which feels important. The medieval equivalent of this isn't recorded anywhere, but you understand intuitively that this is how knowledge persists, not through one brilliant person who's remembered, but through many capable people who practice the innovation and teach it to others. By the end of this period, you're now in your late 40s, which is quite old for medieval life. You become a kind of informal teacher of heating engineering. People from adjacent villages come to learn from you. Your reputation, carefully, is spreading, and the system you've built is becoming normal in your region, which means you've succeeded, even if no one will ever write it down. The sun is setting. You can see it through the small window of your home, the light turning golden, then amber, then fading toward darkness. The quality of light is changing in that way that signals a transition from activity to rest, from work to reflection. Pause. The fire is burning well. The heating system, your system, the one you've been building and refining for more than 20 years now, is working as it should. The house is warm, not uncomfortably warm, not the dry, oxygen-depleted warmth that comes from sitting too close to a roaring fire, but a gentle warmth, distributed evenly, the kind of warmth that lets your body relax. You move through the evening routine with the care that comes from having done it 1,000 times. You feed the fire, adjusting it for the night. You check the channels, running your hand along the walls to verify that heat is distributing properly. You make small adjustments, opening a vent here, closing one there, that will optimize the heat distribution overnight while minimizing fuel consumption. This is meditative work. Your hands know what to do. Your mind is free to wander to reflection, to the arc of time that's passed since you first started experimenting with heating systems. 2 decades, hundreds of hours of labor, countless failures and incremental successes. And what has come of it? A warmer home, a family that's healthier, knowledge that's spreading through the community, an innovation that's saving fuel, saving lives, making winter bearable. Pause. Your youngest child, no longer quite so young, probably 15 now, the time has passed strangely. Sits by the fire, learning to carve with small tools. He's carving a channel guide, a tool that will help others create heating systems with more precision. He's learned this work from watching you. He'll teach it to his own children, probably, and the knowledge will spread further and deeper. This is something you hadn't anticipated when you started, that the work will become generational. That your children would understand heating engineering as something normal, not exceptional. That what you've painstakingly invented, they'll take for granted. Your wife is doing evening work, mending probably by the firelight. She's been complicit in this entire journey. She's never once betrayed your secret. Even though she's had many opportunities, she supported the work, even when it was risky, even when she was afraid. And now, in her late 40s as well, her hands as worn as yours, but her mind still sharp. She's a keeper of the knowledge. She could teach someone else if she needed to. She could continue the work if something happened to you. Pause. The evening settles into quietness. The work is done. The house is warm. Outside, you can imagine the winter darkness, cold, indifferent, just beginning to relent as you approach the point in the season where days start getting longer. Inside, you're comfortable. It's not luxury. It's not the kind of comfort that modern people would recognize. But by medieval standards, it's remarkable. You think about the outputs of this work, the warmth, the health, the knowledge spreading. You think about Jacob, who died believing that someone was going to carry forward the principles he'd taught. You think about the elderly woman who became your first student and who's now teaching others herself. You think about the network of people across the region who understand heating engineering in ways that shouldn't be possible. And you think about the outputs that won't be documented, the lives that weren't lost because families had better heating, the productivity that happened because people's minds weren't entirely consumed with trying to stay warm, the small improvements to human dignity that come from being able to exist in winter without suffering. These outputs won't appear in any history book. No one will quantify them. But they're real. Pause. There's also the output of something intangible. You've proven. through your own work, that innovation is possible outside official channels, that people don't need permission to improve their own conditions, that observation, experimentation, and persistence can solve problems that authorities claim are unsolvable. This is a kind of ideological output, and in its way, it might be the most important one. You know that the heating systems will outlast you. They might be suppressed at some point. If a church official takes the rules more seriously, if authorities decide to crack down, but the knowledge won't disappear. Too many people know now. The information has spread too far. Even if your home is destroyed, even if the visible systems are dismantled, the understanding of how to build them will persist because it's embedded in the minds of dozens of craftspeople and builders who understand the principles. Progress, you've learned, isn't linear. It's not a steady march forward, but it's also not easily reversed. Once enough people understand something, suppression just drives it underground. Knowledge doesn't actually disappear from a world. You're tired now. The work of the day, both the physical work and the emotional work of maintaining the secret and teaching others and carrying the fear, has accumulated into a bone-deep exhaustion. But it's the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from having done something that matters. Pause. You move toward the sleeping area. Your wife is already preparing the bed, arranging the blankets for the cold that will still come overnight. But the cold won't be as bad as it would have been without your systems. Your family will sleep warmer than they would have. Your children's lungs will be less stressed. Tomorrow, you'll wake up less exhausted because the trauma of cold won't have invaded your sleep. Before you sleep, you spend a moment by the fire. You feel the warmth on your face. You feel the distributed heat throughout your home. You feel the knowledge of how it all works, embedded in your hands and your mind after decades of experimentation. You've changed the world in a small way, not obviously, not in a way that anyone will remember your name for, but changed nonetheless. You've proven that another way is possible. You've built something that will outlast you. You've passed knowledge to others who will pass it further. And now, like the heat engineer after a long day, you too can rest knowing that you've done something that matters, knowing that the work continues, spreading to community, being refined and improved by other minds, surviving beyond your own life. Pause. The fire glows. The heat distributes through the hidden channels in your walls. The house settles into evening. And you, having done the work of innovation, having carried the burden of secret knowledge, having taught others, having built something that will survive you, can allow your tired body to rest. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, the work of maintenance, the fear of discovery, the pain in your hands, the dust in your lungs, the constant awareness that you're living outside the bounds of authority. But tonight, you can rest. The warmth surrounds you. Not perfectly, it never is, but enough, more than enough. A reminder that human ingenuity, persistence, and willingness to fail repeatedly can create something that makes life not just bearable, but actually good. And so, like the medieval heat engineer after a long day of secret innovation, you too can rest now, knowing that history continues its gentle rhythm, that knowledge persists when enough people understand it, and that the warmth you create will continue to comfort future generations that like and subscribe our channel and also comment. Sleep well. Pause.